So I just want to thank everybody for coming today. And this is the first opportunity that we have had as an organization to do some presentation uh, with the occult community. We've attended and had tables at different times, but this is our first time presenting. The idea behind talking about who we are and the changing face of Satanism is to really give people an understanding of who we are and what it is that we do. I think there's people laboring under the misapprehension of who we are, and that's not anybody's fault. It's just kind of the way that Satanism has sort of developed something of a dreadful narrative. So hopefully by the end of this, there'll be a little bit more clarity. My intention is to go through everything, provide a little bit of an overview. I will probably try and stick as rigidly as I can to my script. And if there's time and if we're able to make this work out, I'd like to show you one of our filmed rituals as well so that you can get an idea of how it works in practice. And then we can take some questions if there is time for that at the end. So my name is Zeke Apollyon, and I'm the co-founder and the High Cardinal of what we are now referring to as the Global Order of Satan, or Go Satan, as it is affectionately referred to by our membership. We've also been known as the Satanic Temple and Satanic Temple International, and the reasons for our name changes will become a little bit more apparent through the course of my talk today. I am honored to be here today to discuss something that I love very much and hold very dear to my heart. I began cultivating organized Satanism throughout the UK approximately 5 years ago. During this time, we spread from a small London base into cities in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. National census statistics simultaneously showed a 284% growth in self-reporting UK-based Satanists during this time. Over the years, that network further expanded into Sweden, Italy, France, and other territories throughout Europe, Australasia, the Middle East, and South America. In addition to overseeing our own UK chapter, our international council provides guidance and practical support to factions all over the globe to develop networks and practices specific to the needs of the environments and constituency within their respective locales. I hear it often leveled that Satanism is simply inverted Christianity. This premise would suggest that we are perhaps theistic or atheistic, probably God-hating, probably angry, disgruntled, or most certainly inclined towards chaos, anarchy, and disorder, unaware of how derivative the views and practices that we have may be. But I assure you we are none of these things, and it's my hope in this presentation to give you, as the listener, a general overview of the appearance and growth of 20th century Satanism, the origins of misinformation in perpetuity within the collective cultural consciousness about our beliefs, ultimately leading to our current practices today. Scriptures detailing the cosmological struggle between good and evil and its eschatological conclusion at the end of days can be found as far back as the 2nd century BC, during the modern Bronze Age. This oppositional motif, wherein tandem demiurges are credited with creation and destruction, life and death, occur throughout history. Hinduism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, Gnosticism, as well as Christianity and Catholicism each present to some extent central theistic philosophies on moral dualism. The origin of this notion is attributed to primitive difficulties reconciling disease, famine, death, drought, and other horrors of daily life with what these cultures and their people believed to be the existence of a good and just God. The color black has long been used to evoke a negative image, and the color white a positive one, particularly within religious lore. Black was used for the depictions of the devil and demons. Persecutors of the portrayed Jesus were sometimes depicted as black with exaggerated features. Images of the martyrdom of saints often showed black executioners. In medieval theater, actors wore black masks to play demons, and Satan went by a host of names in literature and folklore, such as Black Man and even Black Ethiopian among them. Two brilliant philosophers and gifted musicians with their inimitable talent, shaped by unique perspectives, have been scapegoated for centuries, accused of heresy and of selling their souls to the devil for the promise of wealth and fame. The Italian violinist Niccolo Paganini, born in the late 18th century, was such a talent that rumors of his Faustian pact posthumously kept him from having a proper Catholic burial. The story of Robert Johnson, an early 20th century blues musician, illustrates the meeting of the devil at a crossroads, a feature which endures today in folklore. Led Zeppelin, Bob Dylan, Ozzy Osbourne, Skid Row, and even Jay-Z have all been accused, to some consequence, of collusion with Satan. To discuss Satanism is to discuss otherness and persecution. Its legacy, after all, is one of consignment over empathy to a landfill created by the status quo in order to vilify that which is different, or simply to forget about that which is unpleasant or unfamiliar. Within this realm, it is the resilient Satanist who establishes and defines this territory, creating stability, structure, and order within which to thrive. Anton LaVey is known as the father of the modern Satanic movement. Prior to formation of the Church of Satan, he was interested in the works of Aleister Crowley, and eventually he met some of Crowley's disciples. He began to work on the side as a psychic investigator on cases that police were unable to take, which led him to the realization that many people sought supernatural explanations for things they could not understand. In 1956, he bought a 3-story Victorian house in San Francisco and painted it black. He befriended a few California socialites and formed what he called a magic circle that would meet and discuss the dark side of life. LaVey would often lecture on various occult topics he had been researching and began around this time to codify his burgeoning philosophy. On the suggestion of a friend, he formed the Church of Satan, which was launched officially as an above-ground satanic order, the first of its kind, on Walpurgis Night, 30th of April, 1966. On the day of the formation, LaVey ritualistically shaved his head, started wearing a black suit and a clerical collar. In 1969, he published the Satanic Bible, a collection of essays and philosophical teachings. In 1972, he published the Satanic Rituals, meant to be a companion to the Satanic Bible and containing detailed instructions on performing satanic rituals. By 1973, splinter groups began to form. The Church of Satanic Brotherhood was one of them, but they disbanded after a year when one of the leaders announced his conversion to Christianity. After LaVey died in 1997, his companion and assistant, Blanche Barton, the mother of his son, took over the leadership of the church, and Peter H. Gilmore was appointed as high priest of the church in 2001. He currently resides at their headquarters in New York City. While still an anti-theist religious organization, LaVey performed magic incantations, explaining that the results from these activities were supernormal rather than supernatural, and that eventually a natural explanation would be uncovered for the results yielded by these spells and rituals. His form of Satanism is an ideological portmanteau of atheism and hedonism, wherein Satan is a symbol for unbridled pleasure in life free from moral constraints. LaVey's aim, in his words, was to throw off the chains of convention, base social conformity, religious oppression, and animal stupidity to embrace the only countercultural rational alternative, the freedom of fully realized human potential. The Church of Satan released 9 summarizing statements regarding their satanic creed. Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. Satan represents vital experience instead of spiritual pipe dreams. Satan represents undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. Satan represents kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates. Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. Satan represents man as just another animal, sometimes better, more often worse, than those that walk on all fours, who, because of his divine spiritual and intellectual development, has become the most vicious animal of all. Satan represents all the so-called sins, as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, as he has kept it in business all these years. The church's growing profile and the notoriety of their events and publicity stunts coincided with a spike in the public's obsession with the supernatural. In 1967, Ira Levin wrote a book detailing the fictitious lives of an aspirational couple called the Woodhouses after they unwittingly relocate to a prestigious apartment inhabited by Satanists on Manhattan's Upper West Side. This book, which dealt with dark but universal themes of forced motherhood, religion, paranoia, and a young professional couple trying to fit in, was titled Rosemary's Baby. Spoiler alert, she gives birth to the spawn of Satan. I'm sure most of you have seen it. The book was made into a film almost immediately and garnered 16 different nominations of distinctions, including BAFTAs, Oscars, and Golden Globe Awards. What followed was a string of satanic-themed films: The Devil Rides Out, I Drink Your Blood, The Exorcist, The Omen, The Blood on Satan's Claw, and even Disney couldn't resist cashing in with their feature-length film The Devil and Max Devlin, starring Bill Cosby as a Black American Lucifer. These films helped to solidify in the public conscience the idea of Satanism as a cult of amoral cannibals and blood drinkers with an agenda of evil. In 1973, Canadian and devout Catholic psychiatrist Larry Padzer began treating a woman named Michelle Smith, who would become his wife. During the next 14 months of treatment, Padzer claimed his patient pendulated between screaming and speaking in voices. Dr. Padzer convinced Michelle that she had been a victim of ritual abuse, a term he is credited with coining. She went on to accuse her mother of belonging to a Victorian satanic cult, of murdering children, and forcing her to participate in these alleged rituals when she wasn't kept in a cage. These stories were detailed in a book called Michelle Remembers, published by Pocket Books in 1980, a deal for which the Padzers received $342,000 for the hardcover advance and paperback rights. Now seen as an expert in his field, Dr. Padzer began doing the talk show circuit and taking in new clients who claimed, as consequence of the book's release, to have experienced similar accounts of satanic abuse. Accusations of child cannibalism, pornography, and sex trafficking rings created sensational news items, and the ensuing ritual abuse pandemonium gave birth to a moral outrage and fear known colloquially as the Satanic Panic. Off the back of this trend in recovered memory, Dr. Padzer began advising law enforcement, which dangerously legitimized these false claims and provided an institutional framework with which to begin targeting secularists and occultists alike. And like 12th century Jewish blood libel accusations, 50s McCarthyism in America, and reoccurring witch hunts around the globe over the past 2,000 years, none of these claims were ever substantiated with actual evidence. However, as we know, the truth has never stopped a good rumor from spreading. Near the end of his life, Dr. Padzer stated that it was more important that Michelle believed these things had happened to her than whether they actually had happened. He took no responsibility for the resulting persecution or for the bodies left behind by peddling his false narratives to the world. It has been said that turning an enemy into Satan is useful. It suggests that one's opponents are not just people we disagree with, they're bad. You can't negotiate with them. You can't do anything with them because they're essentially evil. So saying, it would be difficult to discuss modern Satanism without touching on American culture wars of the past 6 decades between progressive liberals and zealous abolitionists wielding conservative values in a crusade to stem the flow of social and spiritual corruption threatened by the existence of science, alternative lifestyles, sexual liberty, and sovereign control over one's own reproductive lifespan. No decade, until recent times, has been more devout or contentious than the 1980s. It was during this decade that conservative politicians began to harness, in earnest, the pursuit of economic progress through subjugation of the lower classes. There needed to be a fear against which the moral right could rally. In the process of collapsing the personal and the political into a world of public intimacy, a nation made for adult citizens was replaced by one imagined for fetuses and children. This clashed with the progressive postmodern vision held by much of the secular world, which favored more radical notions of subjectivity and relativism. This constituted the core of this culture war. The mainstream media played a pivotal role in disseminating conservative cultural politics and promoting this culture war. The American dream became defined through the good old values system, which excluded others through racism, sexism, and classism. This philosophy tied the strength of the nation to private fortune, which by nature was exclusionary because the American dream is a fantasy. To reinforce this notion, images of economically disadvantaged, impoverished, drug-addicted Black Americans were shown through the media, and the rise of the AIDS epidemic was seen as a scourge cast down by God. Televangelism became a booming industry overseen by Republicans, and then came MTV. Music television, which seemed to articulate the growing unease secularists had with the current political narrative. Androgynous rock stars in tights, makeup, and high-heeled boots paraded across teenage television screens, threatening family values with their swagger, sex appeal, and their challenges to authority. American author and evangelical pastor Jacob Aranza published a book in 1982 titled Backward Masking Unmasked, in which he alleged that 75% of rock and roll music was laced with subliminal lyrics the artists recorded backwards, which when listened to encouraged drug use, glorified the occult, and otherwise exposed tens of millions of innocent youth to immorality, homosexuality, violence, rebellion, and suicide pacts. He claimed this information was confided by an executive in the music business to a friend, and that it was part of Satan's four-step plan for the complete and total corruption of youth. Chick Publications backed up these claims in a series of mass-published conservative evangelical mini-comics called Chick Tracts. Each mini-booklet contained unlikely parables in which a main character received divine intervention on their current path to hell, causing them to reflect graphically upon the eternal suffering waiting for them due to ignorance, misplaced faith, or the unforgivable sin of listening to rock and roll. These cheaply reproduced fundamentalist propaganda booklets were targeted at American youth and could be found anywhere young people were. They were so pervasive and so famously anti-gay, anti-Islam, and anti-Catholic that even the Catholic media were prompted to declare them nothing but a world full of paranoia and conspiracy where nothing is what it seems and nearly everything is a satanic plot that leads people to hell. Within the realm of otherness, there is a sense of ownership. In his doctoral thesis on the study of Satanism titled Between the Devil and Darwin for the Norwegian University Department of Archaeology and Religious Studies, Jesper Petersen posits that Satanism must be understood as a concept in marking out a contested space in which actors present themselves as true and genuine and others as false or pseudo-satanic. But contentious and authoritarian stances are a hallmark of many religious leaders and groups. It isn't just for Satanists. The last decade saw the formation of a new above-ground satanic order called the Satanic Temple, LLC. TST, as they are known, is an American atheistic corporation based in the US, formed with the mission statement of encouraging benevolence and empathy among all people. They were denounced by the Church of Satan as not being authentically satanic, both because they weren't LaVeyan and because of the inclusion of compassion to all creatures among their 7 fundamental tenets, which COS has claimed as a waste of time and deeply unsatanic. Although TST's corporate heads are not strictly speaking Satanists, their philosophy of personal autonomy did touch a nerve with the disenfranchised masses who grew increasingly frustrated with life under conservative leadership and thus attracted a large group of both ambient and active followers through social media. At the time, TST appeared to be taking on the hypocrisy of the US governmental system, using parody, crowdfunding, and robust legal strategies to set precedents to protect civil liberties, like the ACLU, but with Baphomet. Most of these followers were Satanists, sometimes living in rural or remote areas, and were looking for community and commonality. So our own organization began as a grassroots effort to establish a UK chapter of the Satanic Temple, and eventually received official recognition a handful of years ago. However, in the summer of 2018, it became clear to us that we would need to separate ourselves from the executive ministry and the National Council of the Satanic Temple. The reasons we cited were a need for freedom from cultural isolationism and the centralized bureaucracy of a tightly controlled American organization who we observed had a litigious agenda and was quickly devolving into an imperial court and cult of personality based around its punitive founder and spokesperson, Lucian Greaves. Concurrent to this decision to declare independence, TST began to splinter within the states, and several chapters chose to disassociate themselves due to conflicts that went unresolved under an increasingly totalitarian leadership. When we left, we took with us the many chapters throughout the world who we had supported and helped to organize, effectively leaving TST to contend with the domestic issues upon which they were narrowly focused, to the detriment of non-US chapters. This is a lot of history. Everybody following so far? Okay. Our group began to see a different path. Far from the reputation of being nihilistic antagonizers, our practice is based around personal enrichment, meaningful ritual, and collectivism. Satanism today is a positive self-identifier, and our ideology helps us define how we live our lives and interact with other people. Satanism is, for all intents and purposes, not a text-based religion in that there is no static doctrine of unchanging principle with which to correlate our worldview as disparate, albeit related orders. A common misconception among the general public is that the Satanic Bible, due to its title, and its standing as one of the very few satanic texts, it's often incorrectly assumed to be a definitive spiritual reference for our practice. But we have 6 guiding pillars which guide our actions, none of which is higher than the other, but they guide our own actions collectively. The first is self-fulfillment and personal understanding allow us to support ourselves and therefore others. Respect the inviolable body, autonomous will, and sovereign right of every individual to guide their own life and being, remembering that enjoyment of these rights is predicated on respect for the same in others. Science, evidence, reason, and critical thinking should guide our beliefs about our universe. Act with empathy, compassion, and wisdom towards yourself and others. Justice always takes precedent over laws, institutions, and religious texts as long as the pursuit of it doesn't countermand these pillars. All people make mistakes. Allow them to correct those mistakes as we seek acceptance in others over our own. It is our view that the foundation of Satanism is built upon the self, and in carrying out his work with humanity in the Miltonian fashion of Romance literature. This work is done when we give a voice to the voiceless, when we challenge authoritarianism and injustice, in the acts of compassion and the practice of empathy, and it is done when we pursue truth and knowledge, not just the knowledge contained within the written word, but also the knowledge of oneself. It is only through self-love and through the vigilant practice of self-care that we find ourselves, needs met, able to give freely to others with ease and without expectation. For the virtue of compassion will open the gates of hell and make us whole. Hell, for us, is a metaphor for the self, with the gates of hell representing a release of one's potential. Some of our rituals invoke infernal names to represent attributes to which we aspire. For example, we may call on Leviathan, swallower of obstacles, and Belial the unmastered as a symbol of self-sufficiency. Some of the questions we hear most frequently are, do you worship the devil? We are atheists, which means we don't believe in the existence of the supernatural. This means no God, no demons, no angels, no ghosts, holy or otherwise, and no devil. Worship is an expression of adoration to something which one reveres, and in our case, we revere ourselves as individuals capable of the greatest human expression of compassion and empathy and love. We have hearts and minds that are imbued with warmth, rationale, and a quality of curiosity that can reason, resolve, and navigate profound existential experiences. That's essentially the heart of our Satanism. This philosophy can be thought of as a type of selfism. If you don't worship the devil, then why do you call yourself satanic? To which we say the name Lucifer actually means light bringer, and nothing is more illuminating than knowledge. In fables, Satan was the first to speak out and voice rational inquiry to an authoritarian god that demanded blind obedience, and for it he was cast out. Of course, we don't believe this actually happened, but historically, we know that those who speak out against the injustices committed by governments, religious dictators, and corporations that consistently prioritize profits over people are often imprisoned, killed, or branded incendiaries. So we believe the allegorical teaching of Satan is the need to use one's own voice as an honest tool of evidence-based dissent against corrupt regimes where one sees it. Use of the name also requires individuals to think about what it is that they actually believe. To its detriment, much of the world's cultural experience is informed by religious dogma and institutional influence, and it can be hard to disentangle what one actually believes from what one has been told to believe. Associating with something typically seen as forbidden and characterized as evil, when evidence shows that thing to be ethical and charitable for the benefit of all mankind, requires a level of rationality and critical thinking that we encourage in our membership. And if people and governments and leaders can do horrible things in the name of God, then we can most certainly do beautiful and inspired things in the name of Satan. So then you're activists, not Satanists? Nope, we are Satanists. Make no mistake, it is the lessons of the literary Satan that we follow: the importance of dissent, rational inquiry, vigilant self-assessment, and the continuing struggle for justice. Because we're committed to acting on our beliefs, this philosophy can take the form of activism, and like anyone else who calls themselves religious, it's our commitment to these deeply held convictions that our organizational identity represents. So yes, we're Satanists, and sometimes activism is just our way of doing the devil's work. Won't the name Satan make it harder to accomplish your goals? Wouldn't it be better if you called yourself something else? People can be superstitious and reactive as individuals and in groups, which is often a symptom of ignorance or entitlement, and we would like to change that. Of course, it's an uphill battle, but every movement towards social equilibrium requires those on the forefront. If the world would take steps to shift its collective approach to differences away from defensive and protective, making an intentional movement towards vigilant integrity in our approach to truth, understanding, and self-awareness, then we might realize we're far less vulnerable and capable of great adaptability, which is empowering. So you don't have rituals or kill babies? What most people think they know about Satanism comes from Hammer horror films. It's not surprising. Those are great films, but it's fiction, not a documentary. We do perform rituals, but so does everyone else in their daily life. Crossing the street is a ritual in which you look both ways beforehand and don't get hit by a fucking car. Checking your email can be a ritual if you have a routine for it. Do you check it when you first wake up? Do you have coffee and a cigarette? Do you play music and dance around the kitchen while you're cooking supper? That's a ritual too, and we ritualize life because it provides comfort, and it can be a hallmark for important events of recognition, such as the ritual of marriage. We perform rituals too, but it isn't black magic. It's just a celebration of life. I've heard that becoming a Satanist will grant me money, fame, and power. I think we get 5 people a day that ask us this. We get a lot of queries from developing countries, to which we say we're sorry to disappoint you, but joining us does not grant you money, fame, or power. So I apologize to anybody who came here with the expectation that they would leave wealthier. And we apologize that you've been lied to. We do get asked if we're related to the U.S. Satanic Temple or to the Church of Satan. They do get conflated a lot because there aren't a lot of above ground organizations that are satanic orders, to which we say that we have no current affiliation with either. We have similar beliefs, but we also have different policies and principles. For example, membership with us is always free. We don't ever ask for money from our members or chapters, and we put into practice our ideals about autonomy and the importance of rebellion. Because we have more of a broad reach, our concerns are global ones and not restricted to our locale. We feel it's important to add a clear and public voice of reason to counterpoint the alternative facts, political agendas, and media spin one hears today. We hope others recognize the truth in our words and know we're looking out for them. Casual glances into history will turn up numerous examples of abusive and tyrannical practices one still sees today, perpetrated oftentimes by extremists who don't even practice what they preach. How many times have we heard a politician insist on drug testing for those on social welfare, or denying LGBT rights, or restricting women's access to family planning services, only to have their hypocrisy subsequently exposed for abuses, including waste of government funds, possession of illegal substances, or even pedophilia? It happens so frequently that you can virtually set your watch to it. In our eyes, public bigotry is probable cause, and it is these people who would make themselves our leaders who force their thoughtless and poorly constructed ideals onto us and bring their lunacy into our classrooms and homes. To which we say, hell no. So do you hate religion? Is something that's also asked. We don't. Religious practice can be a source of immense emotional gratification. We are a religion ourselves, so no, we don't hate religion. What we hate is abuse and bullying. When Catholic charities are taking social welfare money earmarked for HIV prevention, but hide the condoms because they don't believe in them, that's a type of moral bullying with epidemic consequences. When families in one of the most dynamic capitals in the Western world burn to death in substandard housing because of greed, supported by casual classist attitudes, that's economic bullying and a form of genocide. And if you're a bully, especially one who uses religion as a get-out-of-jail-free card in place of compassion and reason, then our organization will probably see you soon. Does it cost anything to be a member? We tell everybody no, membership is always free, and we will never pass around a collection plate. Ritual is a big part of who we are as well. What we do has been described by others in the occult and magic community as shadow work. We cast circles, burn herbs, use symbols and runes, and sometimes do blood magic to achieve our goals. Hailing Satan is hailing the divine self. Consent is a critical feature in all of our ritualistic workings. The gates of hell metaphor is synonymous with being mentally and emotionally present, with hell being the self and the gates representing the release of potential. It can be compared to the opening of chakras. The intention of our initiations, apart from being a meaningful bonding ceremony for new members, is to provide verbal guidance on the finer points of self-reflection and to communicate expectation and to secure understanding. Pomegranates are used allegorically to represent both the purgatory of a probation period, and it is a call to live with oneself as a lord and captain of one's own mind and heart. In February of 2016, we did a ritualistic bloodletting performance to communicate the disposability of banned blood products aimed at sex workers and men who have sex with men. The ritual components included ceremonial purification of self, purification of space, preparation of an altar and apparatus, which in our case included medical equipment to prepare the subject for the bloodletting, and a vessel to catch the blood. Catechism was delivered while the medic prepared the subject, who stated, "No one may impugn my sovereign right of bodily autonomy. I am my own master, and I can only grant authority. I reject as tyranny an authority predicated on violence and self-appointed." The blood was drained using universal precautions, and the assembly was witness to the life-saving gift of blood wasted there. In this instance, it was ceremoniously dumped over the head of the subject. To our great delight, the blood bans were reduced 5 months later in July, so we always say ritual works. Are you guys familiar with the blood bans? There's health and safety regulations were saying that people who had tattoos or people who were sex workers or men who had sex with men weren't allowed to donate blood. This was law for a very long time. But it was a hypocrisy as well because the screening protocols were, it wasn't a catch-all. It was just bigotry sort of propped up in order to, to screen people out. I can explain more about that later if people have questions, but I'm noticing the time, so I want to just kind of slide through some of this stuff because I've still got a little bit to go. Another feature of our practice is campaigning, which we do on a local, national, and international level. It's our conscious intention as an organization to create opportunities for positive change by pairing those with need with others who have the capacity to give. Following the tragic death of Juliana Tudos in Finsbury Park, London last Christmas Eve, we produced, in conjunction with the Devonshire Arms, a document designed to help raise awareness into the dangers of traveling alone by night and methods to help people travel safely. The document includes advice on preparing for a journey, things to look for when using different modes of transport, and how to pick a decent personal arm to carry in case of attack. We also developed the Autonomy Project, which was a response to people who had experienced domestic abuse. Statistics for domestic abuse are quite high. An estimated 1.9 million adults aged 16 to 59 years experienced domestic abuse in a single year. And while services to help and heal are available, lingering scars can sometimes be painful reminders of traumatic events and prove more difficult to erase. Because bodily autonomy is one of the founding principles we were built upon, we believe that one's body is one's own to do with as they choose, and that it's every individual's sovereign right to have full control over oneself for the duration of one's lifetime. It is our desire that nobody be hit, scarred, maimed, mutilated, or abused in any way, ever without consent. To address this, we teamed up with local tattoo shops and artists to create the Autonomy Project. The Autonomy Project allows anyone with cutaneous scars or tattoos, which are the result of domestic abuse, to access free tattoo cover work. Because we see the possibilities for kindness and compassion in the world, and money should never be a barrier to personal growth. We want everyone to wake up every day knowing that their body is their own, and reclamation can be a powerful step in securing that knowledge. Another campaign we engaged in was the Crucifix Initiative, and this took place in Bavaria. Despite separation of church and state being enshrined in the Bavarian Constitution, Bavarian Prime Minister Markus Söder issued an executive mandate that Christian crosses be hung in the entrance of every publicly accessible Bavarian state building, an explicit statement that Islam was unwelcome in Bavaria. In partnership with the artist Darren Cullen, we sent crucifixes to dozens of state buildings along with instructions on how to hang them and a letter forged from Markus Söder himself. The only alteration that we made to the crosses was to place the hanging hook on the bottom edge, a small detail which would force the crucifix to be hung upside down. But that shouldn't matter since Söder said that the cross was not a religious symbol, and Bavarian Interior Minister spokesperson Oliver Platzer said, "We are happy about every cross that is hung up, and that each state authority should hang up the cross as they think best." In summary, Satanism is first a love affair with the self, but it is not for us about hoarding away the satisfaction and abundance generated when one is also meeting one's own needs. It's about advocacy in the great spirit of Romance literature for those unable to advocate for self, and it is inexorably tied to the struggle for freedom and sovereignty in the face of oppression. That's that.